Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. All right, so we are going to do Mock Draft Monday. We actually did it. It's not going to be what I was planning on it being, which is a Green Bay Packers 7-round mock. The reason being, what I would like to do for the Packers 7-round mock, and we could do this for the first-round mocks as well, but I want to give you all an opportunity to actually do some mock drafts, submit them, and then I'll do kind of like a Franken mock where I stitch together different picks and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to be taking these from the Packernet Podcast Facebook group. So that's over at facebook.com/groups/PackerNetPod. If you're looking for that, or just type it in. I doubt there's a lot of competing Packernet Podcast Facebook groups. And so maybe we'll do it tomorrow. I don't really know. We'll see how it goes, if anybody feels like participating or what. Obviously, you guys are already doing a lot of mock drafts. Just drop it in the group. And again, if you could offer up some insights as to why you made the pick, it would kind of help out. Otherwise, I'll just grab it and give you my own thoughts, I guess. But I also still really want to do Mock Draft Monday because I never get them to land on Monday because I just don't think about it, and now I remembered, and so we're doing it. Only real quick note that I forgot to mention yesterday, Packers are hiring Jamel Lett as a defensive backs quality control coach. Sources tell CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports. Lett was a coaching assistant with the Patriots this past season, previously worked in college at South Alabama and North Carolina. So he's following over our new defensive line coach. So we will see how that goes. Glad to have you, sir. But as I mentioned before, these first-round picks take a very long time, so I want to go through them, just kind of looking at some of the news and notes, as well as just anything that can kind of inform how this thing's going to shake out for us come draft day. So the Tennessee Titans do have the first pick in the draft. We've mentioned before that trading is an option here. The handful of options. Number one is to trade the pick. Number two is to take one of the quarterbacks, which are Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. And then the only other two options that I'm aware of anyway are to take Travis Hunter, the cornerback / wide receiver, or Abdul Carter, the pass rusher. If you look at the most popular mocks right now, or the most popular names being mocked to them, Cam Ward is actually way out in front. 42% of mocks have the Titans selecting Cam Ward. Now, again, you got to keep in mind, a lot of mock drafts do not do trades, and so some of these are kind of pigeonholing picks that maybe aren't exactly what people are thinking, but right now, that is by far the most popular pick to the Titans is Cam Ward. With the second pick, there's been a ton of talk about the Cleveland Browns possibly taking a quarterback to kind of replace the situation or eventually replace the situation, but it's not the most popular outcome as of right now. It's worth noting, not that it necessarily matters because of them having the second pick. They have 1 billion picks in this draft. Looks like 12 picks so far. Now, granted, they have mostly late round picks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th round picks. And again, it doesn't matter for our purposes here today. You expect them to move up in, 4th round, 3rd round, something like that maybe. But first round, no. At least I wouldn't think so. It's possible they could. But the most popular pick right now is edge rusher Abdul Carter. I have to assume part of the thinking there is the fact that Myles Garrett is trying to force his way off the team. Cleveland has still dug their heels in saying it's not going to happen, but I'm pretty sure we're all well aware that it's going to happen. So replacing him is going to help ease the tension a little bit, on top of the fact that they're going to get a haul. They're probably going to end up with a second pick in this first round, as well as a bunch of other picks to add to the 12 that they already have. The next most prominent pick is Travis Hunter, but we're going to stick and pick with Abdul Carter here. The Giants are one of the trade targets potentially for the Tennessee Titans. If the Titans did move back, the Giants, as we've talked about, seem pretty desperate for quarterback. There is the whole conversation surrounding whether or not they'd want to go for Matthew Stafford. Again, wouldn't cost them the third pick, but that's not really the conversation. The question is, if they got Matthew Stafford, they probably wouldn't be looking for a quarterback. They might. It wouldn't honestly be the worst idea to bring in Matt Stafford and draft a quarterback and say you're going to sit for 2 years behind Matt Stafford. Stafford might be pissed, but it is what it is. With that said, we're not going to project out that any of those things do happen. I think the next most likely thing, if this thing were to fall the way that it did with Cam Ward going 1, is that any other desperate quarterback teams would have to get up to 2, because you know the Giants are taking a quarterback. So the Giants would be offering a lot to go up to 2, which sounds stupid, but it's what they have to do if they want their quarterback, as well as some other quarterback-needy teams, be that the Raiders or Jets or whatever. Number 2 pick would become very popular, and actually it would make a ton of sense for, if you're the Browns fan, you want the Titans to take a quarterback, because now you can trade back one spot, still get your guy, and get an additional haul. On top of, again, you just traded away Myles Garrett, again, presumably for a haul. So things would fall pretty neatly and nicely into your lap. I guess another way to say that is if a quarterback goes 1, I would be surprised if the Browns don't trade their pick, because you absolutely could trade with the Giants and still get the guy you want, unless you want a quarterback. All right, anyways, with that said, it's very obvious at this point that quarterback would be the pick. Now, Travis Hunter is certainly appealing, and it's possible. Part of the reason for the talk about the Giants wanting to pursue somebody like Matthew Stafford is because they don't love these quarterbacks. Still, I would be shocked with Shedeur Sanders sitting right here that you don't go that direction. So Travis Hunter is an option if they genuinely just cannot stand the quarterbacks. But even still, if you didn't want to take a quarterback, I would be interested. Maybe you wouldn't trade, because Travis Hunter wouldn't make it back to the Raiders probably. So you'd probably have to make the pick. But we're not going to super overthink it. We're just going to have them drafting Shedeur Sanders because they are very much in need of a quarterback. This has the board falling pretty nicely into the lap of the New England Patriots, who desperately need cornerback help. The number 1 player in the entire draft, according to many people, Travis Hunter, would fall right into their lap. You could talk about possibly somebody like Will Campbell or if Abdul Carter was here, it would make sense. But that would only be if Travis Hunter is not here. He is very easy selection. For the Jaguars, the most popular avenue is cornerback. They'd be very sad to see Travis Hunter go 1 spot in front of them. However, there's still a pretty strong option here, and that is Will Johnson out of Michigan. The other thought, though, is they need some defensive tackle help, and depending on what board you're looking at, Mason Graham out of Michigan is a better option. It's possible that they just see Mason Graham as a true blue chipper, whereas maybe not so much Will Johnson, and they do go in that direction. But the most popular pick right now, and it's pretty close, 36.7% for Will Johnson, 32.7% for Mason Graham. Those two are very, very popular. If obviously one of them is not available, the other one is an obvious choice. But I think because cornerback is seen as a bigger need, we're just going to go ahead and take Will Johnson. Again, the board that I'm currently looking at has Mason Graham as a better player, but that isn't necessarily a consensus. As for the Raiders, again, quarterback is a big need, but it's unlikely that a quarterback gets taken here. Possibly, Jackson Dart, if he ends up skyrocketing up, or, there were some people last year that were not seen as necessarily super early, that went earlier than expected. But I don't think that's really expected this year, especially since it's seen as a weaker quarterback class than last year. And we're already on to our 3rd quarterback. So unlikely that happens. A lot of talk about needing defensive help, so Mason Graham would make a ton of sense, as could somebody like James Pierce or something like that. However, if we just stick with sort of the theme here of seeing which way the winds are blowing. Shedeur Sanders is the most popular, but he is gone, obviously. The third most popular is Will Johnson, who's gone. The second most is Teteroa McMillan, 22% roughly of mocks have him going to the Raiders. Again, something to keep an eye on as a potential fall candidate, but sometimes the stars just align where a team like the Raiders is saying, well, we can't get what we want, and so let's look at another need we have at wide receiver. Let's grab this guy and see if we can't hit a home run with a star wide receiver. For the Jets, this one feels relatively easy. They do have several needs. If Teteroa was available, you could possibly go that direction, depending on what happens with wide receiver. I think that's one of the big question marks here. But bearing in mind that Aaron Glenn, the Detroit Lions defensive coordinator, has just taken over, and just looking at the value that's currently here, Mason Graham, defensive tackle out of Michigan, probably makes the most sense. Now, they need offensive line help. There's no doubt about it. So we could see our first, Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks player go off the board. But I'm just going based on what I perceive to be value right now, which is Mason Graham to the Jets, kind of sticking with what the Jets do best and appeasing our new defensive head coach. Mason Graham, by the way, is the most popular pick to the Jets. 23.7% of picks are going that way. Remember, as you go on, it becomes less and less of a consensus because, statistics and whatnot, but that's pretty high for being this late in the draft. Carolina Panthers' top need seemingly right now is edge. None of those guys have gone, and we're kind of getting into where that becomes value, so things have fallen pretty perfectly for the Carolina Panthers. Teteroa McMillan is actually the most popular pick, but he is obviously gone at this point. 18.3% went that way. The next most popular is Michael Williams at 13%, followed by Jalen Walker at 11.8%. Those guys being edge and then linebacker. I think the two things coming together are the need for edge and then the second most popular pick being Michael Williams. So I'm going to go that route, even though that isn't exactly how I'm using Draft Buzz this time around. That's not how they have things sorted. But we're going to stick with the theme, and Michael Williams is going to go to the Carolina Panthers at pick 8. Saints are a little bit more tricky. Kellen Moore is now the head coach of the team, coming from the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, he understands the importance of offensive line. I think offensive line is arguably their biggest need. However, when you look at mock drafts right now, it's Michael Williams, edge rusher, Luther Burden, wide receiver, Teteroa McMillan, wide receiver. But offensive line is also tricky because their biggest need is on the interior, and taking any of the interior guys at 9 is a heck of a reach. If they do have a tackle need, it's at right tackle, not left tackle, because of Trevor Penning. They just took Fuaga last year. Now, maybe they can move Fuaga to the right side or to the interior or something. I don't really know, but the right tackle Penning would be the biggest, the one you'd want to replace the soonest. And Campbell, Banks, and Simmons, the top 3 tackles, at least as I see them, have only ever played, actually, Campbell and Banks have only ever played left tackle. Simmons hasn't played right tackle since his rookie year. So you'd want to go down to Armand Membo, which is a possibility, but now it feels, again, like a bit of a reach. Gray Zabel, possibly, would make sense if that's not seen as a reach. I've also seen Tyler Booker, which, arguably a second-round pick, so probably not. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and play it completely safe and go with what everybody or the consensus that's still available have said, and we're going to take Luther Burden. But I would certainly be looking out for offensive line for the New Orleans Saints. That or edge would also make a lot of sense. Probably actually more sense to take somebody like James Pierce. But we're just going to stick with, again, the next most popular pick, which is Luther Burden. Chicago Bears, as I've said, everybody, the consensus very strongly is that offensive line is the direction they need to go. I think they need to open up their minds a bit on some other possibilities, especially considering we're talking tackle. You have a left tackle that's not terrible, a right tackle that improved last year. It's not a terrible idea, but if you think drafting a tackle is going to fix anything, even if it is your offensive line, that's the problem. rather than your quarterback holding onto the freaking ball too long. The interior is probably a bigger problem than your tackles, but whatever. This is where we are. So protecting Caleb Williams is the most important thing, which, makes sense. But again, it's kind of like the Packers with wide receiver, where it's like, well, we don't have a wide receiver, right? Or a true number one or whatever. Well, yeah, that's true. And our offense wasn't good enough down the stretch, right? Well, yeah, that's true. Okay, so then wide receiver makes sense. Well, it does, unless you acknowledge that maybe the quarterback was the problem, in which case this fixes nothing. If Caleb's the issue, it ain't gonna fix anything. But it doesn't matter. That's, conversation for another day. Should they open their minds to Ashton Jeanty? Maybe. James Pierce or any of the edge rushers? Yes. Should corner be off the table? No. Defensive tackle should be an option. Safety should be an option. But apparently it's not. We'll see what the actual Chicago Bears think. So far, I haven't heard any news on that. And so we'll go with the most popular pick, which is Will Campbell, offensive tackle out of LSU. And then finally, the last one before the break, the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers, as far as the mock drafts are concerned, are very similar to the Chicago Bears. It's all tackles all the time. We absolutely have to protect our guy. There's some, talk about wide receiver, cornerback, defensive line, which I think makes sense. But again, for the sake of what we're doing in terms of where is everybody focused, it's absolutely offensive tackle. Most popular pick to them is Kelvin Banks. That is the next highest graded offensive tackle on our big board here, so that makes the most sense to me. By the way, the only two guys graded higher right now are James Pierce and Ashton Jeanty. Jeanty, via DraftBuzz, is the second highest graded prospect. If the NFL agrees with that in any way, Jeanty's going to be gone by now. Running back or not. If that's how any team in the top 10 views him, he's not getting out of the top 10, but we'll see. James Pierce is the other one, the edge rusher. Edge is always an option, but we're going to go with Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle out of Texas. We'll come back from the break. We got the Dallas Cowboys. That one's going to be a really easy one. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. So there have been a couple of teams that have been very strongly linked to certain players. For example, the Denver Broncos and tight ends. Dallas and Ashton Jeanty have just been a constant recurring theme. In fact, it's almost hilarious because this might be the most mocked player to any team, and we're at pick 12. 58.4% of Dallas Cowboys mock drafts are currently mocking Ashton Jeanty to the Dallas Cowboys. Some other potential needs here: wide receiver, if there were anybody notable available, Luther Burden or Tetaroa McMillan. So it kind of seems to be in that direction. If McMillan is available, look for that. If Burden is available, maybe. Ashton Jeanty, if he's there, probably going to be the guy. The only one that I again would compete with that is probably McMillan. Now, we don't know how their boards are going to be set up. There might be, for example, unlikely, but let's say a guy like Mason Graham is still there. They might look at that defensive tackle. Offensive line could possibly go that way, but this is the easiest pick in the history of the world, especially with the current big board that we're using, which has Ashton Jeanty currently sitting at number 2 overall. Miami Dolphins are another team. This is going to be a run on offensive line, by the way, when you look at potentially the Saints, certainly the Bears, certainly the 49ers, and then Miami, unfortunately for them, positioned behind these teams. Very strong need for offensive line. Just kind of depends where they fall with these things and who they still like. So Josh Simmons, in our case, is still here. Would that be an option? Something to consider. The most popular pick to them, though, has been Malachi Starks, the safety. Arguably, you could say their second biggest need behind offensive line. So again, depending on how things go, that might make the most sense. Kelvin Banks is the second most mocked at 13.3%, but 31% of mock drafts have Malachi Starks going to the Dolphins, which does surprise me a little bit. But we're going to follow in line. We're just going to go right down the line there. Colts are another weird one. Arguably the biggest need that they have is cornerback. I don't know if it's just a value thing or what, but that is not a very popular pick for them at all. Now, Malachi Starks, the safety, he's already gone, but specifically cornerback, guys like Jahdae Barron, Siobhan Revel, Benjamin Morrison, who are still available, Trey Amos, for whatever reason, don't seem to be super popular. The other popular pick, though, which is what we're going to end up focusing on, very popular, by the way, is tight end. Probably the more secondary need, but very, very popular. So Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren are the two tight ends that are available, that are seen as first-round picks. Tyler Warren is largely considered the better of the two and is mocked the most to the Colts, 28.3% of the time. So we will be taking tight end Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Falcons, as I've said, some teams, they just always seem to be looking for one position. Every year you go through the mocks, and every year they want the same thing, and every year it seems to be edge rush for them. With the amount of edge rushers here and with so few taken, it does make sense that this is going to be an edge rusher. The most popular pick is James Pierce Jr., followed by Jalen Walker, followed by Michael Williams, followed by whoever. The one thing that I would point out as a possible option, I mentioned that Jalen Walker, the linebacker, is available. Remember, their defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich, is from the Jets, but he was previously the linebackers coach for Atlanta. Don't know how much that matters, but it's worth noting. The more important thing to know, though, is that the Falcons have 4 picks in this draft. Now, I don't think you can pass on an edge rusher at pick 15 when one of them falls right into your lap like this. But it's not impossible that the Falcons would consider trading back because 4 picks is garbage. They have a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a 4th, and a 7th, and that's it. But for our purposes, this one's pretty straightforward. Highest guy currently on the board, James Pierce, goes to the Falcons. Arizona Cardinals pick next at pick 16. There's not a lot of consensus here. Most popular pick is James Pierce, who just went, and that's just 12.9%. The next is Jalen Walker at 9.6%, and then Derek Harmon at 8.7%. So 69% are everything else. A lot of different guys going to the Cardinals. Cardinals did get a new defensive coordinator. It's worth noting that because a lot of times when you do that, the GM wants to kind of jumpstart this new defensive scheme, this new defensive philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. Arguably, again, there's no real consensus because it's all over the place, but edge rusher being a need, defensive line, linebacker, but also offensive line. So this one is incredibly difficult. If James Pierce were here, I would probably go that route. Jalen Walker is the second most popular, and it, boy oh boy, do I want to break rank already? No, I guess I'll stick with the theme. Linebacker is a need, even if it's not the biggest need. And according to our board, Jalen Walker is the 6th best option available. I don't like the low value of linebacker, especially when you have 2 defensive tackles, an offensive tackle, and a corner available. But we're going to do it anyways. Jalen Walker is going to go to the Cardinals. But worth noting, 2 things for the Cardinals. 1, kind of all over the board, which is a good spot to be in. Take the best player available, which is probably why Jalen Walker doesn't make a ton of sense. 2, they also don't have a lot of picks. They have 5 picks, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Now, all they're missing is a 6th and a 7th, which isn't the end of the world. But still, when you only have those picks and you have a lot of options available to you and you're willing to take a lot of people, this is a pretty solid spot to trade back if anybody's interested in moving up for someone. Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of this is going to come down to who they keep and who they don't, right? There's questions about the wide receivers like T. Higgins. There's questions about Trey Hendrickson and whether they're going to stay. If they end up retaining them, then they're not really needs. If they don't, then they might be needs. Probably why Luther Burden is the most mocked player. Now, it's only 11.7%, but still. Walter Nolan is number 2, followed by James Pierce. I think defensive tackle makes the most sense from the standpoint of no matter what, we need it. We might need an edge. We might need a wide receiver, but I don't know. Defensive tackle, we do need. Walter Nolan is the second most mocked at just 8.5%. He's the third best available player on our board. Makes me sad, but here we are. Walter Nolan is going to go to the Bengals. As for the Seattle Seahawks, something that's kind of interesting, Clint Kubiak is now the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. As his offensive assistant, he is bringing from Denver Justin Outen. You might remember Justin Outen was the tight ends coach for the Green Bay Packers. Tight end is considered one of the top needs for the team. Now, more popular than that is offensive line. Seattle very prominently always seems to want offensive line help. The most popular pick is Tyler Booker. Obviously depends. I mean, for our purposes here, Booker, as I mentioned, is really not seen as a good target. He's 38th overall, but that doesn't mean that that's actually what he is. According to the consensus big board, he's sitting at 21, which would make it a much more reasonable pick. So Tyler Booker does make sense. However, I would very strongly look at somebody like Colston Loveland out of Michigan, the tight end. Now, because he's not one of the top 3 most mocked to the Seahawks, I'm not going to do that. And I will take interior offensive lineman Tyler Booker. It also would make sense to possibly look at a guy like Zabel. Man, I tell you what, this happens every time. These mock draft simulators piss me off. If you don't just fly through it, they just decide to like refresh, then you have to start over entirely. So that's fun. Anyways, let's just continue on. We'll see if I forget something because that mock that we were just doing is now officially gone. Tampa Bay at 19. Top 3 picks are Benjamin Morrison, the corner, Luther Burden, the wide receiver, and Jalen Walker, the linebacker. So again, kind of all over the place. Wide receiver. Well, actually, they have a little thing here that I haven't noticed. Trendy pick. So what's becoming the most popular? Mike Green, edge rusher out of Marshall. But yeah, edge rusher, corner, wide receiver, linebacker. Plenty of options available. I would probably want to go with somebody like Green just because it's the trendy pick and because edge is valuable, et cetera, et cetera. But the most popular pick right now is Benjamin Morrison, so I think we'll just stick with that. Take the cornerback out of Notre Dame. Denver Broncos, another real easy one. Not that this is any kind of a guarantee, you never know, but again, tight end has been the order of the day. And so with one tight end gone, we're going to very obviously take Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan. For the Steelers, the big thing has absolutely been wide receiver. Also considerations for defensive players like corner and defensive tackle. But wide receiver has been by far the most popular. 26% of mock drafts have him taking Emeka Egbuka, and 16% taking Luther Burden. Both of these guys, remember, are of the slot variety, so I'm guessing that's not a coincidence, although it might be just that those are the top 2 wide receivers. Third most popular is cornerback Benjamin Morrison. This is a pretty easy one. We'll end up taking Emeka Egbuka. Wide receiver, Ohio State. I'm sure Aaron Rodgers will appreciate that pick. I'm joking. All right, final pick before the break, and then the Green Bay Packers. We have the LA Chargers. This one is pretty funny because very, very desperate for tight end indeed. They have 33% taking Colston Loveland. He is obviously gone. You have 6.4% taking Tyler Warren. Kenneth Grant is the guy in the middle with defensive tackle. The biggest needs, according to Mock Draft Database anyways, tight end, edge, and defensive tackle. With tight end off the board, edge rusher does make the most sense. Running back is also an interest, but I don't think there's anybody that is super great in this spot. So now that I'm switched over to Mock Draft Database for my new mock draft that I just started, we're going to go with Shamar Stewart. He's not one of the guys picked for the Chargers on the Mock Draft Database website, but it does make the most sense the way the chips have fallen thus far. All right, well, why don't we take a break? We'll come back, and we got the Green Bay Packers on the other side. Just for a little homework assignment through the commercial break, the top prospects via the big board here: Josh Simmons, Armand Membo, Mike Green, the edge rusher, Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle, Jahdae Barron, corner, Nick Scorton, edge rusher, Matthew Golden, wide receiver, Josh Connerly, offensive tackle, Siobhan Revel, cornerback, Jihad Campbell, linebacker. Those are the top remaining in the top 32. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. Well, I would have to assume the most popular pick here among Packer fans would end up being Mike Green, the edge rusher out of Marshall. I'm definitely leery of the offensive tackles, although it's certainly worth considering. I do like Rasheed Walker. I think the Packers like Rasheed Walker. It's just a question of how good do you think these guys are, if it's a genuine blue chip, whatever. But I don't like it, because not only do you need to be a solid starter, you need to be a solid starter that's way better than like a top 10 pass blocking tackle, and that's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to do. There was like one guy from last year's rookie class that was better than Rasheed Walker. Maybe two out of a huge list. Edges, you got Mike Green, Nick Scorton, Jack Sawyer. Corners, Jahdae Barron, Siobhan Revel, Azaria Thomas, Trey Amos. So I tell you what I'm going to do. Because we're going to be doing this more and more, and I don't want to just do the same thing over and over again, I'm going to go with somebody that we talked about yesterday. I didn't get the one guy out of my 2025 school, which is seemingly going to be Ole Miss this year. So I'm going to go with the other guy because I really do like him, and I like his upside, and I'm very intrigued by him. And that is, of course, quarterback Jackson Dart. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to go with wide receiver Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. Minnesota Vikings, the most popular pick for them is cornerback Siobhan Revel, followed by cornerback Jahdae Barron, followed by safety Nick Emanwari. Nick Emanwari is actually the trendy pick now for the Minnesota Vikings. But cornerback is certainly the focus. That's becoming a very popular theme for the Minnesota Vikings, and so we're not going to interrupt that. Siobhan Revel is the most popular pick, so as much as it makes me sad as a Revel fan, we're going to give the Minnesota Vikings Siobhan Revel Jr., cornerback out of East Carolina. Before we completely move off Minnesota, though, another team that, again, got to recognize they have no picks. Now, maybe they end up doing some kind of trade stuff to acquire more picks that way, but it wouldn't be, not that you get a ton being at the back of the first-ish, wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world to see them try to trade back and see if they can acquire at least another pick. They have a first, a third, and 2 fifths, and that's it. For the Texans, the focus is very strongly in favor of the interior offensive line. Tyler Booker is the most popular pick. Some other picks, Kenneth Grant and Emeka Egbuka. It's another team that does have kind of a lot of different directions to go. Even offensive tackle, a lot of other things could make sense. However, I think there is a prospect that makes a good amount of sense, at least to me, not necessarily according to our big board, but I don't really care. Tyler Booker is not available. However, Gray Zabel is of North Dakota State, so we're going to give the Houston Texans Gray Zabel. The Rams at pick 26 seem to have the biggest need out front of them, offensive tackle, which is good because we got a bunch just sitting here not being picked yet. Worth noting, wide receiver could be an option with Cooper Kupp heading out. Another consideration would be cornerback, which you got Jahdae Barron sitting right here. But we are going to go with, by the way, the most popular pick is Josh Connerly, tackle out of Oregon, usually because these guys don't fall this far. Josh Simmons, offensive tackle out of Ohio State, is going to go to the Rams. Ravens have a ton of picks, so as far as those teams looking to trade back, the Ravens could be a team that would be willing to move up. They've got, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 picks so far in the draft. Multiple 4ths, 5ths, and 6ths. Primary need for the Baltimore Ravens, you're looking at the edges. That's offensive line edges and defensive line edges, which is pass rush and offensive tackle. Josh Connerly is the most popular pick for them. Tyler Booker on the interior also. And Ariante Irsi is another guy. Going to keep it simple. Go with Armand Membeau, another offensive tackle that's usually off the board by now. And we'll move on to the Detroit Lions. So, as has been mentioned, despite having one of the top edge rushers in football, edge is seen right now to be the top need. Jack Sawyer, the most popular pick for them, followed by Mike Green, followed by Nick Scorton. So it's very one-dimensional. Defensive tackle also in there. So somewhere along that defensive line, we know they like to build to the trenches. We also know that outside of their top edge rusher, who spent half of last year not playing, they don't have a lot of options. So with that said, I know Jack Sawyer is the top guy. Probably has to do with the way a lot of these mocks fall. We're going to take our top guy on the board, who is Mike Green, edge rusher out of Marshall. Washington right now, a little bit all over the place. Josh Conerly, offensive tackle. I mean, I think the theme here is going to be help the quarterback. Josh Conerly and Josh Simmons, both popular picks. The first and third most popular at 7.1 and 6.7%. The second most popular and the trendy pick is Matthew Golden, wide receiver. Wide receiver is seen as probably the biggest need for the team. And so I'm going to actually agree, and I'm going to give them Matthew Golden. As I mentioned, with Matthew Golden, I'm kind of on the fence with him. It took me a little while to come around, but I started to appreciate Matthew Golden. He's not really seen as a prototypical X receiver, but I could kind of see it as being a decent route runner. Not really as far as him being like a deep threat, but you don't necessarily need that. And again, he can do it just like anybody can do it if you catch him at the right time, using the right footwork, whatever. But that's for us, not for Washington. For Washington's sake, you get what I give you, and you get Matthew Golden. All right? At 30, we have the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills, similar to Detroit, very much a defensive line-focused draft for them right now. That's defensive tackles and edge rushers. Also worth noting, they do have a lot of picks. They got a first, 2 seconds, 2 fourths, 2 fifths, and 3 sixths. So plenty of ammunition to move up if they so desire. Tyleik Williams, Derek Harmon, Kenneth Grant are the 3 most popular picks. Edge obviously is going to be the most desired if it's available. However, Kenneth Grant is our highest prospect. Nick Scorton is right here at 27, Kenneth Grant at 25, but we'll just go in order here. Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle out of Michigan, going to Buffalo. Finally, we get to the Super Bowl teams. Kansas City Chiefs first up. Kansas City Chiefs, especially coming off that absolute beating they took in the postseason, not surprisingly, offensive line seems to be a focus. Offensive tackle primarily, also some talk about interior offensive line. Couple other noted positions of need, defensive line, tight end. The top pick so far, Colson Loveland, but just 6% as the number 1 pick. Ariante Ursi, 5.8%. Cameron Williams, 5%. Probably can go in several different directions here. If you wanted to go Derek Harmon, defensive line. If you wanted to go Donovan Jackson on the interior, whatever. I think the easy and obvious option here, though, is Josh Conerly Jr., offensive tackle out of Oregon. We got to try to protect the franchise a little bit better than what we did in the Super Bowl. And finally, the Super Bowl champion, Philadelphia Eagles. For the Eagles, again, we're looking at the edges, offensive and defensive tackles and edge rushers. Edge rush in particular has been the most popular. Mike Green, 9.4% of mocks, 7.6% for Nick Scorton, and then Jihad Campbell is 5.9% as the third most, who is a linebacker out of Alabama. So, with that, pretty simple. Nick Scorton is the second highest on our list, so we will end up taking Nick Scorton. Jihad Barron, Derek Harmon, Jihad end up falling out of the first round. So, there you go. Green Bay Packers get Trey Harris, wide receiver out of Mississippi. Going to get that big old DK Metcalf style, physical, long strider. Should be fun. All right, I'm going to leave you with that. Have a good one. Bye-bye.